Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Lie. Staff Sergeant Marshall Wyatt crouched behind concrete barriers in the dusty outskirts of Kandahar, sweat dripping down his face despite the cool March evening. 3 tours in Afghanistan had hardened him into something most people back home wouldn't recognize. A calculating predator who'd learned that mercy was a luxury that got good men killed. His phone buzzed against his chest. A text from Jessica Clay, his fiancée of 2 years. His heart actually warmed seeing her name. One of the few emotions he still allowed himself to feel in this hellscape. Missing you so much, baby. Can't wait for the wedding next month. The baby is getting bigger every day. I love you both so much. Marshall smiled. One of his rare, genuine expressions. Jessica was 4 months pregnant with their first child, and the wedding was scheduled for his return. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, maybe, but Marshall had learned to accept the good when it came. 2 hours later, as he cleaned his rifle in the armory, another text came through. This one made his blood freeze. He fell for it. He thinks the baby is his. We'll take his house and his savings after the wedding. That fool will be paying child support for another man's kid. Marshall stared at the screen for a full minute, his mind processing what he'd just read. Then came the immediate follow-up. OMG, wrong person. Delete that. It was meant for MOM. Marshall, please ignore that text. My phone is glitching. Baby, please call me. Marshall's hands didn't shake. They never did anymore. Years of combat had burned that weakness out of him. But something cold and ancient settled in his chest, something that had kept him alive through hell and would serve him well now. He set the phone aside and finished cleaning his weapon with methodical precision. Jessica Clay had just made the worst mistake of her pathetic life. She'd awakened something that had been sleeping, something that enemies of America had learned to fear. But Marshall Wyatt was patient. He'd been hunting human predators for years, and he knew the most important rule: never strike when you're angry. Strike when you're ready. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. Marshall spent the next week conducting reconnaissance, just as he would on any mission. He made one call, not to Jessica, but to his old Army buddy Doug Emery, who now worked private security in Chicago. Doug, I need a favor. Deep background check. Everything you can find. Jessica Clay, age 26, lives in Millbrook Heights. Also Troy Warner, age 28, same area. Financial records, employment history, medical records if you can get them. And I need it fast. Jesus, Marshall, that's your girl, isn't it? What's going on? Just do it, Doug. And keep it quiet. Doug's voice turned serious. He'd served 2 tours with Marshall and knew that tone. You got it, brother. Give me 72 hours. Marshall maintained normal contact with Jessica during this time, responding to her increasingly frantic texts with short, reassuring messages. She was clearly panicked about the accidental text, trying to gauge if he believed her phone glitch story. Can't wait to see you and meet our baby, he texted back, each word calculated to keep her calm and unsuspecting. Meanwhile, Marshall used his military connections to request emergency leave. The false compassionate leave request was approved within hours. One advantage of being a decorated soldier with 3 tours and a spotless record. Doug's report arrived exactly 72 hours later, and it painted a picture that made Marshall's jaw clench. Jessica Clay had been in a relationship with Troy Warner for over 2 years, longer than she'd been with Marshall. Warner was a local real estate agent, married with 2 kids of his own, with a history of financial troubles and gambling debts. The most damaging piece: medical records showed Jessica had conceived during a period when Marshall was deployed, making it impossible for him to be the father. But there was more. Doug had dug deeper, uncovering a pattern. Jessica had been researching military benefits, survivor benefits, and divorce laws in their state. She'd even consulted with a divorce attorney 3 months ago, while telling Marshall how excited she was about their future together. Marshall sat in his bunk that night, staring at the evidence of Jessica's betrayal. Around him, other soldiers slept, some muttering in their dreams about firefights and IEDs. But Marshall was dreaming of something else entirely. He pulled out a notebook and began to write. Plans. Contingencies. A detailed operation that would destroy Jessica Clay and Troy Warner so completely that they'd beg for the mercy he had no intention of giving. The next morning, Marshall boarded a transport plane back to the States. As the aircraft lifted off, he looked out at the Afghan mountains one last time. He learned to hunt in those mountains. Now he was bringing those skills home. Chapter 3. Homecoming Preparations. Marshall landed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, after a grueling 18-hour journey. Instead of heading straight home to Illinois, he made a detour to visit his older brother, Preston Wyatt, who ran a small construction company in Nashville. Preston took one look at Marshall's face and poured 2 whiskeys without being asked. "You look like you're about to start a war, little brother." Something like that. Marshall laid out the entire situation, watching Preston's expression darken with each detail. Preston had always been protective of Marshall, especially after their parents died in a car accident when Marshall was 18. He'd been the one to encourage Marshall to join the Army, knowing his brother needed structure and purpose after their loss. "What do you need?" Preston asked without hesitation. "Equipment, surveillance gear, and I need you to buy a property for me. Cash transaction, your name on the deed. Rural area, isolated. Big enough for privacy." Preston nodded grimly. "I know just a place. Old farmhouse about an hour outside Nashville. Owner died last year. Family wants to sell quick." "What else?" Marshall pulled out a detailed list he'd written on the plane. "Untraceable phones, vehicle with clean plates, and I need you to spread word through your contractor network. You're looking for 2 people for a big job. High pay, out of state, requires relocating for 6 months. You're going to make them disappear." It wasn't a question. Preston knew his brother well enough to recognize when Marshall had moved beyond anger into something far more dangerous. "They destroyed my life before I even knew there was a war," Marshall said quietly. "They made me love a lie, made me dream about a future that never existed. They turned me into a fool." "You're not a fool, Marshall. You're just not a sociopath like them." "I am now." Preston studied his brother's face. The same features they'd shared since childhood, but something behind the eyes had changed. The Marshall who'd left for Afghanistan still had traces of the boy Preston remembered. This Marshall was something else entirely. "All right," Preston said finally. "But we do this smart. No half measures, no loose ends. If we're going to war, we're going to win." They spent the next 2 days planning. Preston purchased the farmhouse, a 40-acre property with a main house, several outbuildings, and complete isolation. He also acquired the requested equipment through various channels, including some items that weren't exactly legal for civilian use. Marshall, meanwhile, began the delicate process of psychological manipulation. He called Jessica, telling her he'd managed to get emergency leave and would be home in 3 days for a surprise visit before shipping out again. Jessica's relief was audible through the phone. "Oh, thank God, baby. I was so worried about that stupid text. I was going to explain everything when you got home." "Explain what?" Marshall asked innocently. "Nothing. I mean the phone thing. It was just, you know how technology is." "I do know," Marshall said, and there was something in his voice that made Jessica pause. "Marshall, are you okay? You sound different. Just tired, sweetheart. Combat changes a man. But don't worry. I'm still the same Marshall you fell in love with." After he hung up, Marshall stared at the phone for a long moment. In a way, he was telling the truth. He was still the same man she'd fallen in love with. The problem was Jessica Clay had never really known who that man was. She was about to find out. Chapter 4. The Wedding March. Marshall arrived home on a Thursday afternoon, exactly as he'd promised. He drove a rental car to the modest house he'd purchased for Jessica 2 years ago, the house she was planning to steal from him after their wedding. Jessica was waiting on the porch, radiant in a yellow sundress that accentuated her pregnancy. For a moment, seeing her there, Marshall felt an echo of the love he'd once carried. Then he remembered the text, and that echo died. "Welcome home, soldier," she said, rushing into his arms. Marshall held her, noting how she trembled slightly. Fear or excitement? Probably both. He kissed her gently, tasting the lies on her lips. "How's our baby?" he asked, placing his hand on her belly. Jessica's smile faltered for just an instant, growing strong. The doctor says everything's perfect. I can't wait to meet him. Just a feeling. Marshall smiled. A father knows these things. That evening, Jessica's mother, Barbara Rogers, joined them for dinner. Barbara was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd never quite approved of Marshall, though she'd hidden it well. Now, with her daughter's windfall approaching, she was almost giddy. "So Marshall, dear," Barbara said over dessert, "Jessica tells me you're thinking of buying a bigger house after the wedding. Somewhere with more room for the baby." "Actually, I've been reconsidering that," Marshall said carefully. "Military pay doesn't go as far as it used to. We might need to scale back our plans." He watched both women tense. Jessica recovered first. "But sweetheart, we've already made so many plans. The nursery, the wedding, everything." "Plans change," Marshall said mildly. "In Afghanistan, you learn to adapt to circumstances beyond your control." Barbara's fork clinked against her plate. "Surely you're not suggesting canceling the wedding?" "Of course not. But maybe something smaller, more intimate, just close family." Marshall could see the panic building in Jessica's eyes. A smaller wedding meant fewer witnesses, less legitimacy, potentially complicating their legal claim to his assets. "Marshall," Jessica said carefully, "is this about that text? Because I swear to you—" "What text?" Barbara interrupted too quickly. Jessica shot her mother a warning look, but Marshall caught it. Another piece of evidence for his growing case file. "Jessica's phone malfunctioned while I was overseas," Marshall explained to Barbara. "Sent some gibberish to me instead of you. Technology, right?" Barbara relaxed visibly. "Oh yes, these phones today. So complicated." After dinner, Marshall and Jessica sat on their porch swing, her head on his shoulder as they watched the sun set. It was peaceful, domestic, everything Marshall had dreamed of during his deployment. "I love you," Jessica whispered. "I know things have been stressful with the deployment and the wedding planning, but I love you so much." "I love you too," Marshall replied, and part of him meant it. He loved the woman he'd thought she was. But that woman had never existed. "Marshall, there's something I need to tell you." Jessica's voice was soft, uncertain. Marshall's muscles tensed. Was she going to confess? "What is it, sweetheart?" I've been seeing a therapist. About anxiety. The pregnancy, your deployment, everything has been so overwhelming." Another lie. Marshall had seen her therapy bills in Doug's report, sessions that started long before her pregnancy. Around the same time, she'd begun planning her deception. "That's good," he said. "Taking care of your mental health is important. For you and the baby." Jessica relaxed against him. "I was worried you'd think I was weak." "I could never think that." Marshall stroked her hair gently. "You're the strongest woman I know." As they sat in the gathering darkness, Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Preston. "Package delivered to the farm. Everything's ready when you are." Marshall deleted the message and squeezed Jessica closer. "You know what?" he said. "You're right about the wedding. Let's do it exactly as planned. Big celebration, all our friends and family. I want everyone to see how happy we are." Jessica's relief was palpable. "Really? Oh, Marshall, I'm so glad. It's going to be perfect." "Yes," Marshall agreed, staring into the darkness beyond their porch. "It's going to be perfect." Chapter 5. The Dance of Deception. The next morning, Marshall suggested they meet with Troy Warner to discuss wedding venues. "I heard he has connections in the real estate business," Marshall said casually. "Maybe he knows some good locations." Jessica's face went pale. "Troy Warner? I don't really know him that well." "Really? That's strange. Doug Emery mentioned seeing you two together several times when he was in town last month." Marshall watched Jessica's mind race, trying to calculate how much he might know. "Oh yes, we've met a few times. Real estate stuff, you know, for the house." "Of course. Well, since we're looking at venues anyway, why not get his professional opinion?" Jessica had no choice but to agree. An hour later, they sat in Troy Warner's office, a sleek space in Millbrook Heights business district. Troy was a handsome man in his late 20s, with the easy charm of a successful salesman. When he saw Marshall, his confidence visibly wavered. "Mr. Wyatt," Troy said, extending his hand. "Jessica's told me so much about you. Thank you for your service." Marshall shook his hand, applying just enough pressure to make Troy wince. She's told me about you, too. All good things. They discussed venue options for 20 minutes, Troy gradually relaxing as the conversation remained professional. Marshall played the role of eager groom perfectly, asking about capacity, catering options, photography setups. There's one place that might be perfect, Troy said, warming to his subject. The old Hartfield estate, about an hour outside town. It's been on the market for months, and the owner might be willing to rent it for events. Beautiful grounds, complete privacy. Privacy sounds perfect, Marshall said. Mind if we take a look? Troy glanced at Jessica, who nodded reluctantly. Sure, I could show you this afternoon. An hour later, they were driving through rolling countryside toward the Hartfield estate. Marshall rode in Troy's BMW, while Jessica followed in her car, claiming she needed to run errands afterward. The estate was impressive, a Victorian mansion on 50 acres, surrounded by woods and completely isolated. Troy led them through the main house, pointing out features that would work well for a wedding reception. The ballroom can hold 200 guests, Troy explained, leading them into a grand space with crystal chandeliers. And the grounds are perfect for an outdoor ceremony. Marshall nodded appreciatively while mentally cataloging the property's isolation, the multiple buildings, the various ways someone could disappear here without a trace. This is perfect, he told Troy. But I have to ask, how do you know so much about this place? You seem very familiar with it. Troy's smile flickered. I've shown it to several clients. It's been hard to sell because of the location. Remote properties can be challenging, Marshall agreed. But sometimes isolation is exactly what you need. Something in Marshall's tone made Troy look at him more carefully. Mr. Wyatt, if you don't mind me asking, what did you do in the Army? Special Forces, reconnaissance, and elimination. Elimination of targets. Marshall's smile was cold. I'm very good at finding people who don't want to be found and dealing with them permanently. Troy's face had gone pale. I see. The thing about hunting, Marshall continued conversationally, is that patience is everything. You have to study your prey, understand their habits, their weaknesses. You have to know them better than they know themselves. That's interesting. For instance, Marshall said, moving closer to Troy, a smart hunter always knows when he's being lied to. Animals lie through their behavior. False confidence, misdirection, panic masquerading as calm. Humans lie the same way. Troy was sweating now, despite the cool air in the mansion. I'm not sure I follow. I think you do. Marshall's voice was quiet, almost gentle. I think you follow perfectly. Before Troy could respond, Jessica appeared in the doorway. How's the tour going? Wonderfully, Marshall said, not taking his eyes off Troy. I was just telling Troy about my work in Afghanistan, how I hunted down enemies who thought they were safe. Jessica's voice was strained. That's nice, honey. Are we almost done here? Almost. Marshall finally looked away from Troy, whose relief was visible. Troy, would you mind giving us a moment alone? I'd like to discuss this with my fiancée privately. Troy nodded quickly and stepped outside. As soon as he was gone, Jessica grabbed Marshall's arm. What was that about? You were scaring him. Was I? I was just being friendly. Marshall studied Jessica's face. You seem nervous too. Is there something I should know about Troy? No, I barely know him. You seemed intense. Combat changes a man, Marshall said again. Sometimes I forget how to turn it off. Jessica relaxed slightly. Maybe we should go. This place gives me the creeps anyway. Actually, I love it. Let's book it for the wedding. Marshall, I don't think. I insist. His voice carried a finality that made Jessica step back. This place is perfect for what I have in mind. Chapter 6, The Art of War. That evening, Marshall sat in his rental car outside Troy Warner's house, a modest suburban home where Troy lived with his wife Dolores and their 2 children. Through the lit windows, Marshall watched Troy attempt to maintain normalcy while clearly shaken from their afternoon encounter. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Miller's Diner, Route 9. Come alone. T. Marshall smiled. Troy was panicking, just as planned. Fear made people stupid, and stupid people made mistakes. Miller's Diner was a 24-hour truck stop on the outskirts of town. Marshall arrived to find Troy already there, hunched over coffee in a corner booth, looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "You came," Troy said as Marshall slid into the opposite seat. "You asked nicely." Marshall signaled the waitress for coffee. "What's on your mind, Troy?" "Look, I know what you think you know, but I don't think anything. I know everything." Marshall's voice was calm, conversational. "I know you've been sleeping with my fiancée for 2 years. I know that's your baby she's carrying. I know about the plan to take my house, my savings, everything I've worked for." Troy's face crumpled. "Ow, because I'm very good at my job. And my job, Troy, is killing people who lie to me. Jesus Christ. He's not going to help you." Marshall leaned forward. "But I might, if you're smart." Troy's eyes flicked up. "What do you want?" "I want Jessica, but not the way you think." Marshall sipped his coffee calmly. "I want her to suffer the way she made me suffer. I want her to feel what it's like to have everything she loves destroyed. I'm not going to help you hurt her. No, let me tell you what's going to happen if you don't." Marshall's voice remained perfectly level. "I'm going to destroy your marriage first. Photos of you and Jessica in bed, sent to your wife. Evidence of the baby, the affair, everything. Your wife will take your kids and half your assets." Troy was shaking now. "You bastard. Then I'm going to destroy your business. A few words to the right people about your flexibility with property disclosures, your gambling debts, your financial irregularities. Real estate is built on trust, Troy. Once that's gone, you're finished. You can't." Then, Marshall continued as if Troy hadn't spoken. "I'm going to destroy you personally. You see, I've learned some interesting things about you, Troy. That gambling problem? You owe money to some very unpleasant people. People who would be very interested to know about your little inheritance plan." Troy's face was white. "Oh, what do you know about?" "I know everything, Troy. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Marshall reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "Option 1. You disappear. Tonight. Leave town. Leave Jessica. Start over somewhere far away. There's a cashier's check in there for $50,000. More than enough to get lost permanently." Troy stared at the envelope. "And if I don't?" "Option 2. You help me give Jessica exactly what she deserves. You play along with her plan, but with some modifications of my own. When it's over, you walk away with your life and your family intact." "What kind of modifications?" Marshall's smile was terrifying. "The kind that will make her beg for the mercy I'm not going to give her." Troy was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. Finally, he looked up. "What do you need me to do?" "First, you're going to convince Jessica to move the wedding to the Hartfield estate. Tell her it's perfect for the plan. Isolated, private, plenty of ways to make me disappear after she gets what she wants." Troy flinched. "Make you disappear?" "Oh yes, Troy. Jessica's plan is more ambitious than you know. She's not planning to divorce me and take half. She's planning to become a grieving military widow with full benefits. A terrible accident on our honeymoon, perhaps. Or maybe a PTSD episode gone wrong." The color drained from Troy's face. "She wouldn't." "Check your phone." Troy pulled out his phone with trembling hands. Marshall had sent him a series of text screenshots, conversations between Jessica and her mother about permanent solutions and widow's benefits. "Jesus," Troy whispered. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know she was planning." "Now you do." Marshall leaned back. "Still think she loves you, Troy? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're just as expendable as I am. How long before she decides you know too much?" Troy was quiet for several minutes, processing this new information. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "What do you want me to do?" Marshall smiled. "I want you to be the perfect boyfriend, Troy. Support her plan, encourage her ambitions. And when the time comes, I want you to help me give her exactly what she's trying to give me. I won't be part of murder." "Murder?" Marshall looked genuinely surprised. "Who said anything about murder?" "Troy, I'm not going to kill Jessica Clay. I'm going to do something much worse." "What?" "I'm going to let her live with the consequences of her choices." Marshall stood, throwing a 20 on the table. "You have 48 hours to decide, Troy. Choose wisely. Because unlike Jessica, I'm not planning to let you live with your mistakes." Chapter 7. The Perfect Wedding. 2 weeks later, the Hartfield estate buzzed with wedding preparations. Jessica had embraced the venue change with enthusiasm, seeing the isolation as perfect for the final phase of her plan. She'd even suggested making it a weekend-long celebration, with guests staying in the estate's guest quarters. Marshall stood in the mansion's library, adjusting his dress uniform in an antique mirror. Through the window, he could see guests arriving, family, friends, fellow soldiers on leave. People who genuinely cared about him and Jessica, who had no idea they were about to witness something that would haunt them forever. Preston entered, also in dress uniform. As Marshall's best man, he'd been privy to every detail of the plan. "Everything's in position," he said quietly. "Doug's team has the perimeter covered. No one's leaving early. The recording equipment, every room, every conversation, audio and video." Preston checked his watch. Jessica's been busy this morning. 3 calls to her mother, 2 to her lawyer, 1 to a number we can't trace. "Life insurance company," Marshall said without looking away from the mirror. "Making sure all the paperwork is in order for her grieving widow act." "You sure about this, brother? Once it starts, there's no going back." Marshall turned from the mirror. The man looking back at him was someone Preston barely recognized. Cold, calculating, utterly without mercy. "I've been sure since the moment I read that text." Downstairs, the ceremony was beginning. Marshall took his position at the altar, looking out at the assembled guests. Jessica's family sat on one side, his on the other. Doug Emery and several other military friends were scattered throughout the crowd. Insurance, in case things went sideways. The music began, and Jessica appeared at the back of the aisle. She was radiant in white silk, her pregnancy barely showing, every inch the blushing bride. As she walked toward him, Marshall felt that familiar echo of love and crushed it ruthlessly. Troy Warner sat in the third row, his wife Dolores beside him, their children playing quietly in the aisle. Troy looked sick, barely holding himself together as he watched the woman he'd betrayed march toward her doom. The ceremony proceeded normally for the first 20 minutes. Marshall spoke his vows with apparent sincerity, watching Jessica glow with triumph as she recited hers. She was minutes away from becoming his legal wife, from gaining access to everything she'd plotted to steal. Then, as the minister reached the critical moment, Marshall raised his hand. "Wait," he said quietly. "Before we continue, there's something I need to share with everyone here." The minister looked confused. "Mr. Wyatt, this is highly irregular. I need to tell you all about the real Jessica Clay." Marshall's voice carried clearly through the hushed room. "The woman I fell in love with. The woman who doesn't exist." Jessica's face went white. "Marshall, what are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth, sweetheart. Something you've forgotten how to do." Marshall reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. With the press of a button, speakers throughout the estate crackled to life, playing the original text message in Jessica's own voice, enhanced and clarified. "He fell for it. He thinks the baby is his. We'll take his house and his savings after the wedding. That fool will be paying child support for another man's kid." The reaction was immediate and devastating. Gasps from the crowd, Jessica's family looking stricken, Marshall's friends rising from their seats in anger. Barbara Rogers tried to stand, but found herself gently but firmly restrained by Doug Emery. "That's not," Jessica started, but Marshall pressed the button again. This time, it was a recording of her conversation with her mother from that morning, discussing the accident they were planning for Marshall during the honeymoon. "You see," Marshall said conversationally, as chaos erupted around them, "I've spent the last month learning everything about the woman I was about to marry. Would you like to hear more?" "Marshall, please," Jessica was crying now, her perfect facade crumbling. "Did you know," Marshall continued, "that Jessica has been researching military widow benefits for 6 months? Or that she's been consulting with lawyers about how to claim my life insurance? Or that the baby she's carrying belongs to Troy Warner, who's sitting right over there with his real family?" Every eye in the room turned to Troy, who had gone pale as death. His wife Dolores stared at him in growing horror as the implication sank in. "Stop," Jessica whispered. "Please stop." "Why?" Marshall asked gently. "We're just getting to the good part." Chapter 8, The Reckoning. The estate's ballroom had been transformed from a wedding reception venue into something resembling a courtroom. Marshall's military friends had quietly positioned themselves at every exit, while Preston coordinated with local law enforcement who were stationed outside. Marshall stood at the center of the room, still in his dress uniform, facing Jessica, who sat in a chair like a defendant awaiting judgment. The wedding guests had been separated into groups, Jessica's co-conspirators on one side, innocent bystanders on the other. Let's start with the timeline, Marshall said, consulting a tablet. 18 months ago, while I was deployed in Afghanistan, Jessica began her relationship with Troy Warner. Medical records show she conceived during this period, making it impossible for me to be the father. Dr. Sarah Kramer, Jessica's obstetrician, looked stricken from the crowd. Jessica, you told me your fiancé was the father. I based all my recommendations on that information. 15 months ago, Marshall continued, Jessica began researching military benefits, specifically those available to widows of combat veterans. She also contacted 3 different law firms about property law and inheritance rights. Jessica's family lawyer, Rick Leonard, stood up from the crowd. Jessica, what is this? You told me you needed advice about protecting your assets in case of your husband's deployment injury. 12 months ago, Jessica purchased a life insurance policy on me without my knowledge, listing herself as the sole beneficiary. She forged my signature on the application. Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd. Insurance fraud was a felony, and everyone knew it. 6 months ago, Jessica began planning my death. Marshall's voice remained calm, professional. Not just divorce, not just theft. Murder, carefully disguised as an accident during our honeymoon. Barbara Rogers finally found her voice. This is insane. Marshall, you're having some kind of breakdown. Am I? Marshall pressed another button on his device. Barbara's voice filled the room, crystal clear. The lake house would be perfect. Remote, no witnesses. Make it look like he went swimming and drowned. Happens to veterans all the time. PTSD, depression, they just give up. Barbara's face went ashen as her own words condemned her. 3 weeks ago, Marshall continued. Jessica contacted a private investigator, asking for someone who could arrange an accident for her husband. Unfortunately for her, that investigator was Doug Emery, my former squad leader. Doug stepped forward from the crowd. Jessica offered me $50,000 to kill her husband. She provided detailed plans, including how to make it look like suicide. I recorded everything. The room erupted in horrified whispers. Several guests looked physically ill. Troy Warner was staring at Jessica as if seeing her for the first time. You didn't know about that part, did you, Troy? Marshall asked gently. About the murder plan? You thought she just wanted to steal my money and leave me alive to pay child support. Troy shook his head mutely, his face a mask of revulsion. The beautiful thing about being a predator, Marshall said, is that you eventually reveal your true nature. Jessica couldn't help herself. She kept escalating, kept planning worse and worse betrayals, until she crossed lines that even her co-conspirators found unacceptable. Marshall walked over to Jessica, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think a man trained to hunt terrorists wouldn't notice when he was being hunted himself? I never meant, Jessica started. You never meant to get caught, Marshall corrected. But you meant everything else. Every lie, every deception, every plan to destroy me. He turned to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I've called you here today not just to witness this revelation, but to serve as a jury. Because Jessica Clay has committed crimes against all of us. She's made fools of my family, liars of her own, and potential accessories to murder of anyone who helped her. Marshall's voice hardened, but I'm not going to let the justice system handle this. They're too gentle, too forgiving. Jessica needs to understand what she's really done. What are you going to do? Jessica whispered. Marshall smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression anyone in the room had ever seen. I'm going to give you exactly what you gave me, Jessica. I'm going to destroy your entire life while leaving you alive to suffer through the consequences. Chapter 9. Justice Served Cold. 6 months later, Marshall Wyatt sat in a small cafe in downtown Nashville, reading a newspaper article about the final chapter of what the media had dubbed the Wedding Day Exposé. The headline read, Former real estate agent sentenced to 10 years for insurance fraud conspiracy. Troy Warner had pled guilty to conspiracy charges, admitting his role in the plot to defraud Marshall's insurance companies. His wife Dolores had divorced him within a week of the wedding day revelations, taking their children and half his assets. His real estate license had been revoked, and he was now serving his sentence in federal prison. But Troy had gotten off easy compared to Jessica. Marshall turned the page to find another article. Mother-daughter conspiracy ring exposed in military benefits fraud. Barbara Rogers had been sentenced to 15 years for her role in organizing the murder plot. Her other assets had been seized under federal racketeering laws. Jessica Clay, who had reverted to her maiden name after their marriage, was declared invalid due to fraud, was serving a 25-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other charges. The baby, born in prison, had been placed for adoption. But the legal consequences were just the beginning of Marshall's revenge. Preston Wyatt entered the cafe and slid into the opposite booth. "The last transfer went through this morning," he reported. "The house, the cars, everything in Jessica's name has been liquidated and donated to military widows assistance programs." Marshall nodded with satisfaction. Every asset Jessica had tried to steal had been legally claimed as evidence, then donated to help real military widows, the very people Jessica had tried to defraud. "What about the estate?" Marshall asked. "Purchased and converted into a veterans retreat center. Doug's running it now, helping soldiers transition back to civilian life." Preston smiled grimly. "We named it the Jessica Clay Memorial Center for Honesty and Integrity." Marshall actually laughed at that, the first genuine laugh Preston had heard from his brother since the deployment. "And the insurance companies? Pursuing civil suits against everyone involved. Even if Jessica ever gets out of prison, she'll spend the rest of her life paying restitution." Preston paused. "Marshall, there's something else. Troy Warner tried to contact you from prison. He wants to apologize." Marshall's expression hardened. "No forgiveness. No second chances. He made his choice. I figured. Just thought you should know." Preston studied his brother's face. "You feel better? Getting all this justice?" Marshall considered the question. Did he feel better? The hollow ache of betrayal was gone, replaced by a cold satisfaction. Jessica Clay had learned what happened when someone tried to prey on Marshall Wyatt. The lesson had cost her everything: her freedom, her child, her future, her hope. "I feel balanced," Marshall said finally. "The scales are even now." A young waitress approached their table, nervous about interrupting. "Excuse me, are you Marshall Wyatt, the soldier from the news?" Marshall tensed, but the woman's expression was one of admiration, not judgment. "I just wanted to thank you," she continued. "My husband was killed in Iraq 3 years ago, and I've been struggling with his benefits. The foundation you set up, the one funded by, well, it saved my life. My kids and I will have lost our house without that help." Marshall looked up at her, seeing genuine gratitude in her eyes. "What's your name?" "Christy Rollins. My husband was Sergeant Michael Rollins, 82nd Airborne." "I knew Mike," Marshall said quietly. "He was a good soldier, a good man." Tears filled Christy's eyes. "He always said the worst thing about serving wasn't the danger. It was worrying that if something happened to him, we'd be forgotten. But because of what you did, because you caught those people trying to steal benefits meant for families like mine, we're not forgotten." After she left, Preston looked at his brother with new understanding. "That's why you did all this. Not just for revenge. Justice," Marshall corrected. "Revenge is personal. Justice serves a larger purpose." Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Doug Emery. "New group of vets arriving at the center tomorrow. 3 combat veterans, all struggling with reintegration. Thanks to your funding, we can help them rebuild their lives." Marshall smiled and replied, "Keep up the good work. Let me know if you need anything." As they left the cafe, Preston asked, "What's next for you?" "Back to active duty." Marshall shook his head. "I'm transitioning out. Go to work with Doug at the center." Turns out hunting predators translates, well, to hunting the demons that chase veterans home from war. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, 2 brothers who had weathered the storm together. Preston said finally, "For what it's worth, I think Jessica Clay got exactly what she deserved. Marshall stopped walking and looked back toward the federal courthouse visible in the distance, where Jessica was serving her sentence. She got exactly what she gave me, Preston. She destroyed everything I believed in, so I destroyed everything she valued. She tried to steal my future, so I erased hers. She wanted to make me suffer for the rest of my life, so I made sure she would suffer for the rest of hers. And you don't feel bad about any of it? Marshall's expression was stone. I feel like a soldier who completed his mission. Nothing more, nothing less. As they drove away, Marshall thought about the last conversation he'd had with Jessica through the prison glass partition. She'd been a broken woman by then. All her schemes collapsed. All her dreams turned to ash. "I'm sorry," she'd whispered through the phone. "I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry." Marshall had looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had once made him believe in love and hope and a future worth fighting for. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust, Jessica. Sorry doesn't give me back the months I spent believing your lies. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you tried to have me murdered. I know. I need you to know I never meant for it to go that far. Yes, you did. Every choice you made led to that moment. Every lie, every deception, every betrayal. You built this prison cell with your own hands. Jessica had started crying then, but Marshall felt nothing. The woman he'd loved had never existed. The woman sitting across from him was a stranger who had stolen her face. "Will you ever forgive me?" she'd asked. Marshall had stood to leave. "Jessica, I'm going to give you one last gift, the truth. I will never forgive you. I will never forget what you tried to do to me. And every day, for the rest of your life, you're going to remember that you had a man who would have died for you, and you chose to destroy him instead. That had been 6 months ago." Jessica would spend the next 24 and a half years thinking about that conversation, just as Marshall had spent his last night in Afghanistan thinking about her betrayal. The scales were balanced. Justice was served, and Marshall Wyatt was finally free. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Behind the Curtain. The fluorescent lights of the department store cast harsh shadows as Roger Gordon held his 7-year-old daughter Kate's hand, navigating through the women's clothing section. It was supposed to be a simple Saturday afternoon. Kate needed new school clothes, and Melissa had claimed she was too busy with her book club to come along. "Daddy, I need to try this on," Kate said, holding up a small purple dress. Roger smiled at his daughter, the only pure thing left in his increasingly complicated world. At 35, he'd built Gordon & Associates from nothing into one of the most successful consulting firms in the city. His success had afforded them this comfortable life, but lately, something felt wrong. Melissa had become distant, secretive, always on her phone with hushed conversations that stopped the moment he entered a room. As they approached the fitting rooms, Kate suddenly froze. Her small hand gripped his with surprising strength. "Get into the fitting room now," she whispered urgently, her usual cheerful voice replaced by something Roger had never heard before, fear. Before he could ask what was wrong, Kate pushed him toward an empty fitting room and jumped in after him, pulling the curtains shut. In the cramped space, she pressed her finger to her lips and pointed toward a gap in the curtain. "Don't make a sound. Look through the gap," she whispered in his ear. Roger's blood turned to ice as he peered through the small opening. There, not 15 feet away, stood his wife Melissa in an intimate embrace with Jeremy Torres, his business partner, his best friend since college, the man who'd been the best man at their wedding 8 years ago. But it wasn't just the affair that made Roger's jaw clench. He could hear their conversation clearly. "The insurance policy is worth $3 million, Melissa was saying, her manicured fingers tracing Jeremy's chest. "Once Roger has his accident, we'll wait 6 months, then we can be together openly." Jeremy's laugh was cold. "Your husband always was too trusting. He still doesn't suspect I've been funneling clients to my side company. When he's gone, I'll have full control of the firm." What about Kate? Melissa asked, and Roger's heart stopped. Boarding school in Switzerland. She'll be out of our hair, and the trust fund will keep her comfortable. She's not really a problem. Roger felt Kate's small body trembling against him. His 7-year-old daughter had just heard her mother and his best friend casually discussing his murder and her own abandonment. The rage that filled him was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Cold, calculating, and absolute. "We should go," Jeremy said. "I told him I was meeting the Henderson account today, and I'm supposed to be at book club," Melissa replied with a laugh. Poor Roger, working so hard while we plan his future. They kissed again before separating, each leaving in different directions. Roger remained frozen in the fitting room, his mind already beginning to process what he'd heard. These weren't just cheaters. They were conspirators planning his death and his daughter's exile. Kate looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Daddy, what did they mean?" Roger knelt down and pulled his daughter close, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Daddy's going to take care of everything." But as he spoke those words, Roger Gordon was already transforming. The trusting husband and loyal friend was dying, replaced by something far more dangerous. Jeremy and Melissa had made a critical error. They'd underestimated the man they were trying to destroy, and they'd done it in front of his daughter. That was unforgivable. Chapter 2. The Hunter Awakens. The drive home was silent, except for the soft music playing on the radio. Kate sat in her booster seat, clutching the purple dress she'd wanted to try on but never did. Roger's hands gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles as his mind raced through the implications of what they'd witnessed. $3 million insurance policy. He'd signed those papers 6 months ago when Jeremy had suggested they both increase their coverage as successful business owners. How convenient. "Daddy," Kate's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you going to tell Mommy what we heard?" Roger caught her eyes in the rearview mirror. His daughter was intelligent beyond her years, and she deserved honesty to a point. "No, Kate. We're going to keep this our secret for now. Can you do that for Daddy?" She nodded solemnly. "Will you protect us?" The question hit him like a physical blow. This 7-year-old was asking if he could protect them from her own mother. "Always," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. When they arrived home, their house in the upscale neighborhood looked the same, but everything had changed. The white colonial with its perfectly manicured lawn now felt like a stage set for an elaborate deception. Melissa's car was in the driveway. "Remember," Roger whispered to Kate as they walked to the front door, "this is our secret." Inside, Melissa was in the kitchen, wearing the same outfit she'd had on at the store, preparing dinner as if she'd been home all afternoon. "How was shopping?" she asked without looking up, her voice carrying its usual warm tone that Roger now recognized as completely artificial. "Good." Kate found a dress she likes. Roger set the shopping bag on the counter, studying his wife's face. 8 years of marriage, and he was realizing he'd never truly known her at all. Melissa was undeniably beautiful. Blonde hair, green eyes, the kind of looks that turned heads in restaurants. She'd been working as a marketing coordinator when they met, though she'd quit after Kate was born, claiming she wanted to focus on being a mother. Now Roger wondered if she'd ever wanted to be a mother at all. "How was book club?" he asked casually. "Oh, you know how it is. Martha's always dominating the conversation." Melissa's lie came so easily, so naturally. "We're reading some mystery novel. Very predictable plot." The irony wasn't lost on Roger. Predictable can be good sometimes. Means you can see the ending coming. That evening, after Kate was in bed, Roger sat in his home office, supposedly reviewing contracts, but actually beginning his investigation. He started with the basics: phone records, credit card statements, anything that might reveal the scope of their betrayal. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. The affair had been going on for over a year. Hotel charges, restaurant receipts, even a weekend trip to Napa that Melissa had claimed was a spa retreat with her sister. But more disturbing were the business irregularities. Jeremy had been systematically stealing clients, setting up competing contracts, and positioning himself to take over the firm. At midnight, Roger's phone buzzed with a text from Jeremy. "Sorry I had to bail on the Henderson meeting today. Family emergency. Can we reschedule for Monday?" Roger stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. No problem. Family always comes first. He meant every word, just not in the way Jeremy would understand. Over the next few days, Roger became a study in control performance. He went to work, came home, kissed his wife, played with his daughter, and acted like the same trusting man he'd always been. But every moment was calculated, every interaction designed to gather more intelligence. He learned that Melissa had been researching accidental death scenarios, drowning, car accidents, workplace incidents. She'd even visited the office 3 times in the past month, familiarizing herself with the building's layout and security systems. Jeremy, meanwhile, had been more subtle but equally treacherous. He'd been undermining Roger's relationships with key clients, spreading rumors about Roger's instability and poor judgment. Several clients had already begun distancing themselves from Roger specifically. The life insurance policy wasn't the end goal. It was just one piece of a larger plan to destroy Roger Gordon completely and take everything he'd built. By Friday evening, Roger had a complete picture of their conspiracy. As he sat in his office, Kate sleeping upstairs and Melissa in the living room watching television, he began planning his response. Roger Gordon had built his business on understanding people's weaknesses and exploiting them legally for competitive advantage. Now he would use those same skills for something far more personal. Jeremy and Melissa wanted to play a game where the stakes were his life and his daughter's future. Fine. But they were about to learn that Roger Gordon had been playing games at a much higher level than they'd ever imagined. And in this game, there would be only one winner. Chapter 3. The Foundation of War. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Melissa made pancakes while humming, Kate played with her dolls, and Roger read the newspaper like he had countless weekends before. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Roger had spent Saturday night digging deeper into Jeremy's background, and what he discovered painted a picture of a man who'd been playing a long game for years. Jeremy Torres wasn't just a business partner who'd fallen for Roger's wife. He was a predator who'd been circling Roger's life like a vulture. The truth was uglier than simple betrayal. Jeremy had grown up in the same upper-middle-class neighborhood as Roger, but where Roger's family had worked for their success, Jeremy's had inherited wealth that they'd subsequently lost through bad investments and gambling. By college, Jeremy had been reduced to accepting charity, including the scholarship that brought him to the same business school where he'd met Roger. Jeremy had always resented Roger's natural success, the way opportunities seemed to fall into his lap, the respect he commanded without effort. When Roger had offered him a partnership in the consulting firm, Jeremy had seen it not as friendship, but as his chance to finally claim what he felt he deserved. The affair with Melissa hadn't been passion. It had been recruitment. Roger discovered that Jeremy had specifically targeted Melissa, learning her routines, her insecurities, her dreams of a more luxurious lifestyle. He'd seduced her not because he loved her, but because she was the perfect weapon against Roger. The insurance plan was just the finale of a systematic destruction that had been going on for 2 years. "Daddy, you're squeezing your coffee cup really hard," Kate observed from across the breakfast table. Roger relaxed his grip and smiled at his daughter. "Sorry, sweetheart. Daddy was just thinking about work." "Is work bad?" she asked innocently. "Sometimes people at work aren't who they pretend to be," Roger said, glancing meaningfully at Melissa, who continued buttering her pancakes without reaction. What Melissa didn't know was that her husband had been quietly investigating her background as well. The perfect wife and mother image she presented had its own dark secrets. Melissa Lawson, before she'd become Melissa Gordon, had a history of targeting successful men. Her first marriage at 21 had lasted exactly long enough to claim half of a tech entrepreneur's startup money in the divorce. Her second relationship had ended when her boyfriend's family business mysteriously burned down just after she'd been added to his insurance policy as a beneficiary. She'd never been charged with anything, but the pattern was clear. Melissa was a professional predator, and Roger had been her biggest catch yet. The realization should have devastated him, but instead, it clarified everything. This wasn't about love gone wrong or friendship betrayed. This was war, and it had been declared on him years ago without his knowledge. "I need to run to the office for a few hours," Roger announced, finishing his coffee. Kate, want to come help Daddy with some filing? Kate brightened immediately. She loved visiting the office on weekends, playing with the copy machine, and organizing paperclips while Roger worked. Can't she stay home with me? Melissa asked. We could have a girls' day. She's been looking forward to office time. Roger replied smoothly. Besides, you mentioned wanting to catch up on your reading. 20 minutes later, Roger and Kate were alone in his office building. While Kate entertained herself with office supplies, Roger began the real work, not filing, but planning. He accessed the building's security system, reviewed camera angles and blind spots. He studied the building's maintenance schedules, evacuation procedures, and emergency protocols. If Jeremy and Melissa were planning an accident for him here, he needed to understand exactly how they might attempt it. But more importantly, he began designing his counterstrike. Roger had always been methodical, but now he was operating with surgical precision. He created multiple scenarios, contingency plans, and fail-safes. This wouldn't be about simply exposing their plot. That would just lead to arrests, trials, and the possibility of plea bargains or reduced sentences. Roger wanted total destruction. Daddy, what's that? Kate asked, pointing to the building blueprints spread across his desk. It's like a map of our building, sweetheart. Daddy's trying to make sure it's safe for everyone who works here. Kate studied the blueprints with the seriousness of a 7-year-old given an important task. Are the bad people going to come here? Roger knelt down to her level. Kate, I need you to understand something important. Sometimes adults make bad choices, and when they do, they have to face consequences. Do you understand? She nodded solemnly. And sometimes, the people we love most need our help to stay safe. Can you help Daddy keep our family safe? Yes, she said without hesitation. Roger pulled her close, smelling her strawberry shampoo and feeling the weight of responsibility. Kate was the only innocent in this whole mess, and she would be protected at all costs. By Sunday evening, Roger had the framework of his plan. It was ambitious, dangerous, and absolutely ruthless. Jeremy and Melissa wanted to destroy him methodically. He would return the favor, but with the precision of a master strategist rather than the clumsiness of amateur criminals. As they drove home, Kate fell asleep in her car's seat, and Roger made a quiet promise to his sleeping daughter. By the time this was over, she would be safe, and the people who'd threatened her would understand exactly why you never attack Roger Gordon's family. The game had begun, but Jeremy and Melissa didn't know they were playing yet. That was exactly how Roger wanted it. Chapter 4. The Perfect Mask. Monday morning arrived with autumn rain drumming against the windows of Gordon and Associates. Roger sat in his office, reviewing client files while watching Jeremy through his glass door. His business partner moved through the office with easy confidence, greeting employees, discussing projects, playing the role of a dedicated professional. If Roger hadn't witnessed the conversation in the store, he would never have suspected the man plotting his death was sitting 20 feet away, sipping coffee and reviewing quarterly reports. Jeremy appeared in his doorway, wearing the same friendly smile he'd worn for 8 years. Got a minute to discuss the Morrison account? Of course. Roger gestured to the chair across from his desk, studying Jeremy's face for any tell, any sign of the monster beneath the mask. There was nothing, just the same earnest expression Jeremy had worn through countless late nights building their business together. They spent 30 minutes discussing client strategies, and Roger played his part perfectly. Attentive, collaborative, trusting. He even asked Jeremy's advice on a few decisions, watching his former friend enthusiastically help him make choices that would later be used against him. By the way, Jeremy said as he prepared to leave, I was thinking we should update our business insurance policies. With the firm growing so quickly, we might be underprotected. Roger nodded thoughtfully. Good point. I'll call our agent this week. Already did. He's sending over some new proposals. Jeremy's smile was warm, fraternal. I know you've got a lot on your plate, so I figured I'd handle the legwork. I appreciate that, Jerry. Thanks for looking out for me. After Jeremy left, Roger sat in silence for several minutes. The casual way Jeremy had just accelerated their murder timeline was breathtaking. He wasn't just evil. He was patient, thorough, and absolutely confident in his victim's stupidity. That confidence would be his downfall. Roger spent the morning implementing phase 1 of his plan, creating the illusion of vulnerability. He began making small mistakes, forgetting meetings, misplacing files, seeming distracted and overwhelmed. Nothing dramatic, just enough to support Jeremy's narrative about Roger's declining competence. At lunch, he met with 3 key clients at separate times, each conversation carefully orchestrated. With Henderson Industries, he expressed concerns about the firm's future direction. With Coastal Shipping, he mentioned being tired and considering early retirement. With Metropolitan Bank, he hinted at family pressures affecting his judgment. To each client, he made it clear that Jeremy Torres was his most trusted partner and would be handling more of their account personally going forward. By the end of the week, word would spread through their professional network that Roger Gordon was burning out, possibly having personal problems, and that Jeremy Torres was quietly stepping up to maintain continuity for clients. It was exactly the narrative Jeremy had been building, but now Roger was accelerating it under his own control. That evening, Roger arrived home to find Melissa in an unusually good mood. She'd prepared his favorite dinner, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, and opened a bottle of expensive wine. "What's the occasion?" he asked, kissing her cheek and inhaling the perfume that had once driven him wild but now made his skin crawl. "Can't a wife make a special dinner for her hard-working husband?" Melissa's smile was radiant, and Roger realized she was celebrating. Something had happened today that had moved their plan forward. Over dinner, she asked casual questions about his work stress, his partnership with Jeremy, whether he'd been having trouble sleeping. Each question was designed to gauge his mental state, to confirm that their psychological warfare was working. Roger played along perfectly, admitting to feeling overwhelmed, questioning some of his business decisions, even mentioning that he'd been having strange dreams. "Maybe you should take a vacation," Melissa suggested. "Just you and me. Kate could stay with my sister for a week." The suggestion sent ice through Roger's veins. Getting him alone, away from witnesses, would make their accident much easier to arrange. And separating him from Kate would ensure she couldn't inadvertently interfere with her plans. "That sounds wonderful," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You always know exactly what I need." Melissa's smile was triumphant, and Roger realized she thought she was manipulating him perfectly. In her mind, she was playing a brilliant game, gradually weakening her target before delivering the killing blow. After Kate was in bed, Roger retreated to his home office while Melissa took a bath. He had 30 minutes to make progress on the next phase of his plan before she became suspicious of his absence. He pulled up the security camera footage from Jeremy's apartment building, a system he'd hacked into over the weekend using skills from his corporate espionage consulting work. For the past week, he'd been tracking Jeremy's movements, learning his routines, mapping his vulnerabilities. What he discovered was a man growing increasingly reckless. Jeremy's confidence in their plan was making him sloppy. He'd been meeting with Melissa in broad daylight, making phone calls from his office, even researching accident scenarios on his work computer. Jeremy thought he was untouchable, but he was actually creating a perfect evidence trail. Roger opened a new file on his encrypted laptop and began documenting everything, not for the police, but for his own purposes. When the time came to destroy Jeremy Torres, he wanted to have every sin cataloged and ready for retribution. "Honey," Melissa's voice called from upstairs. "Come to bed." Roger closed the laptop and smiled to himself. His wife was calling him to the bed where she lay awake at night planning his murder. The irony was almost amusing. "Coming, sweetheart," he called back. As he climbed the stairs, Roger reflected on how much his life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, he'd been a trusting husband and loyal friend. Tonight, he was becoming something else entirely, something Jeremy and Melissa had created through their own betrayal. They'd wanted to destroy Roger Gordon, the successful businessman, the loving father, the trusting friend. Mission accomplished. But what they'd created in his place was far more dangerous than anything they planned for. Chapter 5. Setting the Board. 2 weeks into his performance, Roger had become a master of controlled deterioration. His employees whispered concerns about his distracted behavior. Clients expressed sympathy for his obvious stress, and Jeremy had begun openly discussing contingency plans for the firm's leadership. Everything was proceeding exactly as Roger intended. On a rainy Thursday morning, Roger sat in his office reviewing the latest phase of his plan when his assistant buzzed through the intercom. "Mr. Gordon, your daughter's school is online too." Roger's blood froze. Kate was supposed to be safe at school. Had they moved against her already? "This is Roger Gordon," he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mr. Gordon, this is Principal Martinez. Kate is fine, but we need you to come in for a conference. There's been an incident." 20 minutes later, Roger sat across from Principal Martinez and Kate's teacher, Mrs. Chun, in the elementary school's main office. Kate sat beside him, looking small and defiant. "Kate has been asking some very concerning questions," Mrs. Chun began carefully. "She's been talking about bad people who might hurt her family, asking about what happens when parents die, whether children have to live with strangers." Roger felt his heart sink. His intelligent daughter had been processing what she'd heard in the fitting room, and it was affecting her behavior at school. She also drew this during art time, Principal Martinez added, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. Roger stared at the drawing, a crude but recognizable representation of a woman and man standing over a fallen figure, while a small girl hid behind a curtain. Kate had drawn the scene from the department store with startling accuracy. Has something happened at home that might have triggered these concerns? Mrs. Chun asked gently. Roger looked at his daughter, seeing the fear and confusion in her eyes. She was 7 years old and carrying the weight of adult secrets that no child should bear. "Kate, sweetheart, can you wait outside for a moment? There are some books by the secretary's desk." After Kate left, Roger made a calculated decision. "My wife and I are having some marital difficulties," he said quietly. "Kate may have overheard arguments about divorce, custody arrangements. She's probably scared about her family breaking up." It wasn't the whole truth, but it explained Kate's behavior without exposing the real danger they were in. "Children are very perceptive," Principal Martinez said kindly. "Even when parents think they're hiding problems, kids pick up on tension and conflict. We're working with a family counselor," Roger lied smoothly. "I'll make sure Kate knows she's safe and loved, regardless of what happens between her mother and me." The meeting ended with promises to monitor Kate's emotional state and recommendations for family therapy. As they walked to the car, Kate slipped her small hand into his. "Did I get in trouble?" she asked quietly. "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong." Roger knelt down to her level in the parking lot. "But we need to be extra careful about our secret, okay? Some grown-ups might not understand, and we need to keep you safe. Are you going to leave me and Mommy?" The question broke Roger's heart. Kate was asking if he would abandon her with Melissa, not knowing that her mother was planning to send her away to boarding school after murdering her father. "I will never leave you," Roger promised, pulling her close. "Whatever happens, Daddy will always protect you. Always." That evening, Roger's phone rang as he was helping Kate with her homework. Jeremy's name appeared on the caller ID. "Hey, partner." Jeremy's voice was warm, concerned. "I heard Kate had some trouble at school today. Everything okay?" Roger felt a chill. How had Jeremy known about the school incident? The only people who should have known were the school staff, Kate, and Melissa. She must have called Jeremy immediately after Roger told her about the meeting. "Just kid stuff," Roger replied casually. "You know how it is. Divorce rumors spread fast in small schools." "Divorce?" Jeremy's surprise sounded genuine. "Dude, I had no idea things were that bad with you and Melissa." The performance was flawless. Jeremy sounded like a concerned friend getting devastating news, not a man who'd been planning Roger's murder with the same wife he was supposedly just learning about divorcing. "We're trying to work things out," Roger said. But Kate's picking up on the tension. "Kids are smart. If you need anything, someone to talk to, help with Kate, whatever, you know I'm here for you." Roger closed his eyes, marveling at Jeremy's ability to offer help while actively destroying his life. "Thanks, Jerry. That means a lot." After hanging up, Roger sat in his home office and opened his encrypted files. Jeremy's call had confirmed something important. They were accelerating their timeline. The school incident had spooked them, probably making them worry that Kate might inadvertently reveal something dangerous. Roger pulled up the building schematics he'd been studying and cross-referenced them with the maintenance schedules Jeremy had been reviewing. There was a pattern emerging. Jeremy had been paying special attention to the building's electrical systems, specifically the areas around Roger's office. An electrical fire would be perfect. Tragic accident, complete destruction of evidence. And Jeremy would emerge as the grieving partner ready to rebuild the firm in Roger's memory. Roger leaned back in his chair and smiled coldly. Jeremy's plan was actually quite good, methodical, plausible, with minimal risk of detection. Too bad Roger knew about it. Over the next few days, Roger began the most dangerous phase of his plan. He started leaving his office door unlocked during lunch breaks, making his computer more accessible, even mentioning to Jeremy that he'd been working late nights to catch up on projects. To anyone watching, it would look like Roger was becoming careless, creating opportunities for an accident. But Roger was actually creating controlled opportunities for Jeremy to advance his plan, while ensuring every move was monitored and recorded. On Saturday morning, Roger installed the final piece of his surveillance network, a nearly invisible camera system that would capture everything happening in his office, the hallway, and the electrical room Jeremy had been frequenting. As he finished the installation, Roger's phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Book club is going to run late tonight. Don't wait up." Another lie, another secret meeting with Jeremy. But this time, Roger was ready. He activated his surveillance system and smiled grimly. Let them plan their final moves. Every word, every action, every betrayal would be recorded for posterity. Jeremy and Melissa thought they were closing in for the kill. They had no idea they were walking into a trap that had been designed by someone far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Chapter 6. The Perfect Storm. The following Monday brought news that made Jeremy's eyes light up with barely concealed excitement. The building's electrical system was scheduled for maintenance upgrades starting Wednesday, requiring after-hours work when the building would be mostly empty. "Guess I'll be working from home Wednesday night," Roger mentioned casually during their morning partner meeting. "Actually," Jeremy said quickly, "I was thinking we should both be here to oversee the work. You know how contractors can be. One mistake could damage our servers." Roger nodded thoughtfully. "Good point. I'll plan to stay late." The trap was set. That evening, Roger made his final preparations. He'd spent weeks documenting Jeremy and Melissa's conspiracy, gathering evidence, and preparing contingencies. Tonight, he would implement the last phase of his counter-operation. Kate was staying at her friend Emma's house for a sleepover, arranged by Melissa, who'd claimed she wanted to surprise Daddy with a romantic evening. The irony was perfect. Melissa thought she was clearing the house for Roger's final night alive, but she was actually ensuring Kate's safety while Roger destroyed her world. At dinner, Melissa was glowing with anticipation. She'd prepared another elaborate meal, opened expensive wine, and kept touching Roger's hand with fake affection. "You seem different lately," she said, studying his face. "More relaxed, somehow." "I've been thinking about what you said, about taking that vacation," Roger replied. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been pushing too hard." Melissa's smile was radiant. In her mind, she was looking at a man who'd accepted his fate, who was ready to stop fighting and let events unfold naturally. "I love you," she said, and Roger marveled at how easily the lie came to her lips. "I love you too," he replied, and meant it in his own way. He loved the memory of who he'd thought she was, loved the lessons she'd taught him about human nature, loved the motivation she'd given him to become something stronger. At 10 p.m., Roger's phone rang. Jeremy's voice was tense, urgent. "Roger, we got a problem at the office. The electrical work started early, and there's been a short in your office. I'm here now, but we need to secure the client files before anything gets damaged." Roger closed his eyes, listening to Jeremy perform his final act. The concern was perfect, the urgency compelling. If Roger had been the trusting fool they thought he was, he'd be rushing to the office right now to meet his death. "I'll be right there," Roger said. "Be careful driving. This rain is getting heavy." Roger hung up and looked at Melissa, who was trying to hide her excitement behind a mask of concern. Office emergency, he explained. Electrical problems. Oh no, Melissa breathed. That sounds dangerous. Maybe you should wait until morning. Can't risk losing client data. I'll be back soon. He kissed her forehead, smelling her perfume one last time, then grabbed his keys and headed for the door. But instead of driving to his office, Roger drove 3 blocks away and parked in the lot of an all-night diner. He pulled out his laptop and activated the surveillance system he'd installed in the building. On his screen, he could see Jeremy moving through the office with purpose, heading straight for the electrical room. Roger watched his former friend disable security cameras, jam door locks, and begin the process of creating what would look like a tragic accident. Jeremy was good, professional, methodical, covering his tracks as he went. But he was also completely focused on preparing his trap, unaware that he was being recorded from multiple angles by Roger's hidden cameras. At 10:47 p.m., Jeremy's phone rang. Roger couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see Jeremy nodding, checking his watch, making final adjustments to his preparations. The call had to be from Melissa, confirming that Roger was en route. Roger waited until 11:15, letting Jeremy sweat as his victim failed to arrive on schedule. Then he sent a carefully crafted text. Storm getting worse. Taking shelter at truck stop. We'll try to get there soon. Through his cameras, Roger watched Jeremy's visible relief. The delay was explainable, wouldn't disrupt the plan, just required patience. At midnight, Roger put his plan into motion. He placed an anonymous call to the fire department, reporting smoke and strange electrical smells from his building. Then he called the police, claiming he'd seen suspicious activity around the business district. Finally, he called the local news station with a tip about a potential arson investigation. While emergency responders raced toward his building, Roger drove home. He arrived to find Melissa pacing anxiously, her phone in her hand. She'd been trying to reach Jeremy, wondering why the plan was taking so long to unfold. Roger, she rushed to him with apparent relief. I was so worried when you didn't answer your phone. Battery died, Roger said simply. The roads were too dangerous, so I came home. I'll deal with the office problems in the morning. He watched confusion and fear flicker across Melissa's face. If Roger was home safe, what was happening to Jeremy at the office? At 12:23 a.m., Melissa's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, saw Jeremy's name, and answered with visible anxiety. Hello. Her voice was carefully neutral, but Roger could see panic in her eyes. Mrs. Gordon? The voice on the other end wasn't Jeremy. It was a police officer. This is Detective Paula Patrick with the Metro Police. We need to speak with you about Jeremy Torres. Roger watched his wife's face go white as she realized Jeremy had been caught, arrested, exposed. Her carefully planned perfect crime had somehow become a disaster. I don't understand, she stammered. What's happened? Mr. Torres was arrested tonight for attempted arson and conspiracy. He's made some very serious allegations involving you and your husband. We'll need you to come in for questioning. As Melissa began to hyperventilate, Roger put his arm around her shoulders in a gesture of support that she couldn't see was actually a restraint. Don't worry, sweetheart, he said softly. I'm sure we can clear this all up. But Roger knew there would be no clearing up. Jeremy had been caught red-handed with enough evidence to convict him of attempted murder. And when faced with life in prison, he would inevitably implicate Melissa to try to reduce his sentence. The perfect crime had become the perfect trap, and Roger's enemies had walked into it with their eyes wide open. Now came the truly ruthless part. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. Detective Paula Patrick was a 20-year veteran with sharp eyes and the kind of patient demeanor that made guilty people confess their sins. She sat across from Jeremy Torres in the interrogation room, studying the man who'd been caught with enough incendiary equipment to burn down a city block. Let's start from the beginning, Mr. Torres, she said calmly. What were you doing in that building at midnight with electrical components that have been modified to cause fires? Jeremy's lawyer, a nervous public defender named Casey Hull, had already advised his client to remain silent. But Jeremy was in full panic mode, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. You don't understand, Jeremy said, ignoring his lawyer's frantic gestures. This wasn't my idea. I was being manipulated. Roger Gordon, my business partner, he's been planning to fake his own death for the insurance money, and he set me up to take the fall. Detective Patrick raised an eyebrow. It was a creative story. She'd give him that. So you're saying Mr. Gordon asked you to burn down his own office? Not exactly. Jeremy ran his hands through his hair, realizing how insane his story sounded. Look, I know how this looks, but I was trying to stop him. He's been acting erratically, talking about ending it all, and I thought he was going to hurt himself by burning down the building. He wanted it to look like an accident. For his daughter's sake, for the insurance. I was trying to stage it so the fire department would catch him before he could go through with it. Detective Patrick glanced at the evidence photos spread across the table. These modified electrical components suggest someone with extensive knowledge of arson techniques. Are you an expert in fire investigation, Mr. Torres? Jeremy's silence was answer enough. 3 hours into the interrogation, Jeremy finally broke completely. Okay, yes, I was planning to burn down the office. But not to hurt Roger, to save him. Save him from what? From his wife. Melissa Gordon has been planning to kill her husband for months. She manipulated me into helping her, threatened me, said if I didn't help her, she'd frame me for embezzlement. I was trying to create evidence of her plan before she could carry it out. Detective Patrick leaned forward. You're saying Mrs. Gordon is planning to murder her husband? The life insurance, the affairs, the psychological manipulation. She's been destroying him systematically. I was gathering evidence when you arrested me. It was a masterful performance, Jeremy thought. He was repositioning himself as the hero, trying to save his friend from a murderous wife. The story had just enough truth mixed with lies to be believable. What Jeremy didn't know was that Detective Patrick had already received an anonymous package containing months of surveillance footage, financial records, and recorded conversations between Jeremy and Melissa discussing their plans in explicit detail. Mr. Torres, Detective Patrick said quietly, I'm going to play something for you. She activated a small digital recorder. Jeremy's own voice filled the room, crystal clear. The insurance policy is worth $3 million. Once Roger has his accident, we'll wait 6 months, then we could be together openly. Jeremy's face went ashen as he heard himself discussing murder plans with casual enthusiasm. The recording continued, capturing every detail of their conspiracy in his own words. Ow, he whispered. Someone has been watching you very carefully, Mr. Torres. Someone who documented every move you made, every conversation you had, every plan you developed. Jeremy stared at the recorder in horror. Roger. He knew. He's been playing us the whole time. Detective Patrick smiled grimly. Mr. Torres, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted arson, and fraud. Your lawyer can explain your rights. As Jeremy was led away, he kept repeating the same phrase. He played us. He played us perfectly. Meanwhile, at the Gordon house, Melissa was pacing frantically while Roger sat calmly on the couch, ostensibly trying to reach Jeremy by phone. Still no answer. Roger said with fake concern, I'm starting to worry something serious has happened. Melissa's phone rang, and she lunged for it desperately. But instead of Jeremy's voice, she heard Detective Patrick. Mrs. Gordon, we need you to come to the station. Your friend, Mr. Torres, has told us some very interesting stories about you. Melissa's legs gave out, and she collapsed into a chair. I want a lawyer. That's your right, ma'am. But I should mention that we have some recordings you might want to hear before you make any formal statements. After Melissa hung up, she looked at Roger with wild eyes. Jeremy must have been wearing a wire. The police have recordings of us together. Roger's expression was perfectly shocked. Recordings of what? Melissa, what aren't you telling me? Melissa tried to think of a story, any story that might explain away whatever evidence Jeremy had provided. Jeremy's been blackmailing me. He said he loved me, threatened to destroy our marriage if I didn't meet with him. I was trying to protect our family. Blackmail? Roger's voice was hurt, confused. Why didn't you tell me? We could have gone to the police together. Melissa realized she was trapped. Whatever Jeremy had told the police, whatever evidence they had, she was already implicated. Her only hope was to convince Roger that she was a victim too. I was scared, she whispered. Jeremy said he would ruin your business, destroy everything we'd built. I thought I could handle it myself. Roger knelt beside her chair and took her hands gently. Sweetheart, we'll get through this. Whatever Jeremy has done, whatever lies he's told, we'll face it together. Melissa began to cry, partly from relief that Roger seemed to believe her, partly from terror about what was coming next. What she didn't know was that Roger was recording every word of her confession, adding it to the massive evidence file he'd been building for weeks. I love you, she sobbed. I never wanted any of this to happen. I know, Roger said softly, stroking her hair. But we need to call our lawyer now. We need to protect our family. As Melissa cried against his shoulder, Roger smiled coldly over her head. Jeremy was in custody, facing life in prison. Melissa was about to be arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. But Roger wasn't finished. The real revenge was just beginning. Chapter 8. No Mercy. The next morning brought a media circus that transformed the quiet suburban neighborhood into a war zone of satellite trucks and reporters. News crews camped outside the Gordon house, drawn by the salacious story of a successful businessman whose wife and business partner had conspired to murder him. Roger stood at his living room window, watching reporters practice their opening lines for the morning broadcasts. Kate had been safely transported to his sister's house before dawn, protected from the chaos that was about to engulf their world. They're calling it the perfect marriage murder plot, Melissa said flatly from the kitchen table, where she sat surrounded by legal documents. Her lawyer, Alan Hastings, was an expensive criminal defense attorney who specialized in high-profile cases. Mrs. Gordon, Hastings said carefully, the evidence against you is substantial. The recordings, the financial records, the surveillance footage, the prosecution has built a very strong case. Melissa looked at Roger desperately. You believe me, don't you? You know I would never hurt you. Roger sat beside her and took her hand. To any observer, he looked like a devoted husband standing by his wife in her darkest hour. I believe you were manipulated, he said gently. Jeremy took advantage of your kindness, your trust. But we need to understand exactly what evidence the police think they have. What Roger knew, and Melissa didn't, was that the evidence wasn't just substantial, it was overwhelming. Because Roger had provided all of it. Over the past month, he'd systematically documented every aspect of their conspiracy. The hotel receipts, the phone records, the insurance paperwork. Everything had been carefully preserved and annotated. But more damning were the recordings Roger had made of Jeremy and Melissa's conversations, captured by surveillance equipment they'd never suspected. There's something else, Hastings said reluctantly. Mr. Torres is claiming that you were the mastermind of the entire plot. He's saying you seduced him, manipulated him, and threatened him with false embezzlement charges if he didn't cooperate. Melissa's face went white. That's not true. Jeremy approached me. He said Roger was planning to leave me, that he wanted to help me secure my future. Can you prove that? Hastings asked. Melissa fell silent, realizing that her word against Jeremy's wouldn't be enough. Roger squeezed her hand supportively. We'll figure this out, sweetheart. The truth always comes out. But Roger knew the truth had already come out, carefully, methodically, and exactly as he'd planned. That afternoon, Detective Patrick arrived with a warrant for Melissa's arrest. Roger held his wife as she cried, whispering reassurances while she was handcuffed and led away. I'll call the lawyer, he promised. I'll get you the best defense money can buy. And he meant it. Roger wanted Melissa to have excellent legal representation because he wanted her trial to be thorough, public, and devastating. He wanted every detail of her betrayal exposed, every lie dissected, every manipulation revealed. After the police left, Roger sat alone in his house for the first time in weeks. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant voices of reporters still camped outside. He opened his laptop and reviewed the final phase of his plan. Jeremy and Melissa were facing murder conspiracy charges that would likely result in life sentences. But prison wasn't enough for Roger. He wanted total destruction, complete annihilation of everything they cared about. Jeremy's arrest had already triggered an investigation into the consulting firm's finances. Roger had carefully planted evidence suggesting that Jeremy had been embezzling funds for years, manipulating client accounts, and preparing to flee the country with stolen money. Jeremy's reputation in the business community was destroyed. No one would ever trust him again, even if he somehow avoided conviction. Melissa's destruction would be more personal. Roger had discovered that her parents, who lived in a retirement community in Florida, had no idea their daughter was capable of murder. Her sister, a teacher in Colorado, had been horrified to learn about the charges. Melissa's entire family network was collapsing as people distanced themselves from the scandal. But Roger wasn't finished. He'd also discovered that both Jeremy and Melissa had hidden assets they'd been planning to use after his death. Money moved to offshore accounts, property purchased under false names, investments made in preparation for their new life together. Roger had systematically exposed every hidden asset to the IRS, triggering tax fraud investigations that would result in additional criminal charges. Even if they somehow beat the murder conspiracy charges, they'd still face federal tax evasion prosecutions. There would be no escape, no plea bargains, no reduced sentences. Roger had ensured that Jeremy and Melissa would spend the rest of their lives paying for their betrayal. As evening fell, Roger's sister Evelyn called to check on him. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I'm surviving," Roger replied. "It's hard to believe people I trusted could do something like this. Kate's asking about you. She doesn't understand why Mommy can't come home." Roger closed his eyes. His daughter was the only innocent victim in this whole mess, and protecting her from the full truth would be his greatest challenge. Tell her Mommy made some bad choices and has to go away for a while. Tell her Daddy loves her and will never let anything bad happen to her. Roger, what happens now? With custody, with Kate's future? Roger had already consulted family law attorneys, prepared guardianship documents, and established trust funds. Kate would be financially secure for the rest of her life, and she would never have to see Melissa again unless she chose to. "Kate will be fine," Roger said quietly. "I'll make sure she's protected from all of this." After hanging up, Roger walked through his empty house, remembering the life he'd thought he was living just weeks ago. The man who'd trusted Jeremy and loved Melissa was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. Jeremy and Melissa had wanted to destroy Roger Gordon, the trusting husband and loyal friend. Mission accomplished, but they'd created something far worse in his place. A man who understood that mercy was weakness, that forgiveness was stupidity, and that some betrayals demanded absolute retribution. Tomorrow, the trials would begin, and Roger would be there for every moment, watching his enemies face the consequences of their choices. They'd taught him that the world was full of predators who viewed kindness as vulnerability. He'd learned the lesson well. Chapter 9. Scorched Earth. 6 months later, the trials were over. Jeremy Torres had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted arson, and fraud. He tried to claim mental illness, temporary insanity, manipulation by Melissa, every defense his lawyers could devise. None of it worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, the premeditation too clear, the intent too obvious. Melissa Gordon received the same sentence. Her trial had been even more devastating, as prosecutors painted her as the true mastermind who'd seduced Jeremy into murder for insurance money. Her lawyers' attempts to portray her as another victim had crumbled under the weight of surveillance footage, showing her researching accident scenarios and discussing Kate's boarding school arrangements. Roger had attended every day of both trials, sitting in the front row, his face a mask of sorrowful dignity. To the media and public, he was the perfect victim, a successful man who trusted the wrong people and nearly paid with his life. He gave measured interviews about forgiveness and moving forward, about protecting his daughter from the trauma of betrayal. But there was more to his revenge than prison sentences. The Gordon house sat empty now, listed for sale as part of the divorce proceedings. Roger had moved with Kate to a new city, a fresh start where his daughter could grow up without the shadow of her mother's crimes. Kate, now 8, was thriving in her new school. She'd been through extensive therapy to process what she'd witnessed, and while she still had nightmares occasionally, she was beginning to heal. She rarely asked about Melissa anymore, accepting Roger's explanation that some people make choices that hurt their families and have to face consequences. Jeremy's family had disowned him completely. His parents, wealthy retirees who'd already been embarrassed by their son's failures, publicly denounced him and changed their wills to remove any mention of his name. His sister, a respected physician, had moved across the country to escape the scandal. Melissa's family had been equally devastated. Her parents had sold their retirement home and moved to a small town where no one knew their name. Her sister had lost her teaching job when parents complained about having a murderer's relative working with their children. But Roger's revenge went deeper than public humiliation. He discovered that Jeremy had a teenage son from a previous relationship, a boy named Benjamin who'd been planning to attend college on his father's financial support. Roger had anonymously established a scholarship fund for the boy, ensuring he could get his education despite his father's crimes. The scholarship came with one condition. Benjamin had to legally change his last name, severing all connection to the Torres family. For Melissa's elderly parents, Roger had arranged for their medical debts to be mysteriously paid off by an anonymous benefactor, while simultaneously ensuring they received detailed reports about their daughter's prison conditions. They would spend their remaining years grateful for unexpected financial relief while knowing exactly what their daughter had become. Every act of apparent kindness was actually another twist of a knife, a reminder that Roger Gordon's reach extended far beyond prison walls. On a cold February evening, Roger sat in his new office overlooking the city skyline. His consulting firm had been rebuilt from scratch, larger and more successful than before. The publicity from the trials had paradoxically brought him more business. Clients were drawn to the man who'd survived such dramatic betrayal and emerged stronger. His phone rang, and his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Gordon, you have a visitor. Jeremy Torres's lawyer is here." Roger smiled coldly. "Send him in." Casey Hull entered the office looking defeated and desperate. Jeremy's former public defender had been struggling since the trial, his career damaged by association with such a high-profile loss. "Mr. Gordon, thank you for seeing me," Hull said nervously. "I'm here about Jeremy Torres." "What about him?" "He wants to make a deal. He claims he has information about other crimes, other people who might be in danger. He's willing to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence." Roger leaned back in his chair, studying the lawyer's face. "What kind of information?" "He won't say unless he gets guarantees about sentence reduction. But he claims there are other cases, other conspiracies he was involved in before he met your wife." "How interesting." Roger's voice was calm, disinterested. "And what does this have to do with me?" "He specifically asked me to approach you. He said you're the only person who might be willing to listen, to help facilitate a deal with the prosecutors." Roger was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. Jeremy was trapped in a cage of his own making, desperate enough to invent new crimes just for the chance of a slightly smaller cage. "Mr. Hull," Roger said finally, "Jeremy Torres tried to murder me for money. He conspired with my wife to destroy my family. Why would I help him with anything? He said to tell you that he knows you're not the man you pretended to be during the trial. He said you'd understand what that means." Roger's expression didn't change, but his eyes grew colder. Jeremy had figured out that Roger had orchestrated his own capture, that the victim had actually been the puppet master all along. "Tell Mr. Torres that I'm exactly who I appeared to be during the trial, a man who believes in justice, consequences, and protecting his family. If he has information about other crimes, he should share it with the proper authorities out of civic duty, not for personal gain." Hull shifted uncomfortably. "He won't cooperate without guarantees." "Then he won't cooperate." Roger stood up, indicating the meeting was over. "Good day, Mr. Hull." After the lawyer left, Roger returned to his desk and opened a secure file on his computer. Inside were detailed plans for the next phase of his life. New business ventures, political connections, social organizations. He was building something larger than revenge now, creating a network of influence that would ensure his family was never vulnerable again. The phone on his desk chimed with a text message. Kate's babysitter was confirming pickup times for tomorrow's school events. Roger smiled, thinking about his daughter's art show tomorrow evening. Kate had painted a picture of their new house, complete with a garden where she wanted to plant flowers in the spring. She was 8 years old and already planning for the future, confident that her father would keep her safe. At 9 p.m., Roger drove home to their new house, a beautiful colonial in a gated community where Kate could ride her bicycle safely and make friends whose parents had been carefully vetted by private investigators. Kate was already in bed, but she'd left a note on his pillow. "Daddy, thank you for taking care of us. I love you more than all the stars." Roger held the note for a long moment, thinking about the man he'd been a year ago, trusting, optimistic, believing the best about people. That man was gone, murdered as surely as Jeremy and Melissa had intended to murder his body. But from his ashes had risen something stronger, more capable of protecting what mattered. Roger Gordon no longer believed in forgiveness or second chances. He'd learned that mercy was a luxury that good people couldn't afford in a world full of predators. Jeremy and Melissa had taught him that lesson in the cruelest way possible, and he learned it well. In the distance, thunder rolled across the night sky, promising storms ahead. But Roger wasn't worried about storms anymore. He'd become the storm, and his enemies had learned too late that some tempests show no mercy, grant no quarter, and leave nothing but devastation in their wake. Roger Gordon had become exactly what the world had forced him to become: unforgiving, uncompromising, and utterly ruthless in protecting what was his. Jeremy and Melissa had wanted to destroy his life. Instead, they'd forged him into something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The old Roger Gordon was dead. What remained was infinitely more formidable. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.